They popped champagne for a $200 million deal I built from scratch. Less than 20 minutes later, they dragged me into a soundproof room and slashed my salary by 60%. They thought I was just a quiet coder who would swallow the humiliation. They were wrong. Before the ice in their drinks could even melt, I triggered Clause 49C. By tomorrow morning, their empire would burn down. Hello and welcome back to Boss Revenge Stories. I want to sincerely thank you for being such an amazing audience and supporting our journey so far. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us with zero budget to continue operations, meaning we will not be uploading new videos here in the near future. Instead, we are moving our operations to Patreon. If you enjoyed today's story, please consider supporting us there to hear even more incredible, exclusive true stories with longer lengths and deeply detailed situations that we simply cannot share publicly on YouTube, complete with immersive multi-voice narrations. You can join our new community by scanning the QR code currently on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link down in the video description or pinned comment. Now, let us dive right into the cold, calculated world of today's story. And my name is Haley Hayes. I was 32 years old, serving as the core artificial intelligence architect at Vortexa Global Solutions, a tech firm aggressively climbing the ranks by providing automated logistics platforms. In the corporate hierarchy, I was basically a ghost. But in the digital infrastructure, I was a god. I was the one who had directly written 90% of the predictive routing algorithm. That algorithm was not just a tool, it was the entire beating heart of the company, the sole asset that gave Vortexa its actual market value. Just hours ago, the sales team had successfully closed a $200 million contract with the retail giant Apex Retail Empire. That massive deal hinged completely on a flawless artificial intelligence demo I had built from the ground up. I had spent 4 agonizing months pulling back-to-back all-nighters, fueled by cheap coffee and pure spite, to perfect the predictive models. My code literally saved this company from the absolute brink of bankruptcy. But corporate tech is a brutal ecosystem, and the contrast could not have been more sickening. Out in the grand lobby, Marcus, our newly appointed Chief Technology Officer, and Chloe, the Vice President of Finance, were busy preparing a lavish, self-congratulatory celebration. They ordered expensive catering and premium alcohol, getting ready to bathe in the glory of a victory they did nothing to earn. Meanwhile, I was still sitting in this freezing, dimly lit corner of the main server room. The constant, droning hum of the cooling units was my only company. I sat there eating a slice of cold, greasy pizza, meticulously running one final diagnostic scan for security vulnerabilities. They loved the architecture, but they despised acknowledging the architect. Working in the shadows of a corporate machine teaches you a lot about structural vulnerabilities, both in software and in human nature. 2 years ago, I watched a parade of brilliant, exhausted engineers get drained of every drop of their creative energy, only to be fired without a shred of mercy the moment their core modules were successfully deployed. I knew the executives viewed developers as disposable parts. I knew my turn on the chopping block was inevitable. You cannot build a bulletproof logistics system without anticipating hostile internal bugs. So, I built a safeguard. I quietly embedded a highly encrypted data integrity protection protocol deep within the neural core of the artificial intelligence. To any auditor or external developer, it looked exactly like a routine federal cybersecurity compliance update. I named it Clause 49C. Clause 49C was a masterpiece of defensive programming. The parameters of the clause were absolute, unfeeling, and purely logical, operating on the very same ruthless principles the executives used to run the business. The rule was beautifully simple. If the master administrative account, which belonged exclusively to me, experienced a sudden deprivation of financial benefits, or if the system detected specific data markers indicating internal suppression and hostility toward my credentials, it would immediately execute a countermeasure. The system would classify the administrative override as an internal security threat and autonomously shift the entire $200 million predictive framework into a state of data quarantine. The diagnostic scan on my monitor finished. 0 errors. The routing logic was flawless, primed to direct thousands of freight trucks across the nation with perfect, mathematically proven efficiency. I locked my computer screen, watching the heavy darkness of the server room reflect against the black monitor. I stood up, stretching my stiff back, and adjusted the collar of my cheap, worn-out winter jacket. I grabbed my keycard and stepped out of the icy server room, moving down the long corridor toward the main hall. Up ahead, I could hear the distinct sound of crystal glasses clinking and the loud, fake laughter of executives celebrating their newfound wealth. I walked straight toward the noise, completely unaware that my unyielding loyalty was already being sold to the lowest bidder. The main hall was an unrecognizable landscape of corporate excess. They had transformed the normally sterile lobby into a sickening display of triumph, complete with cascading towers of imported champagne and oversized silver balloons spelling out the name of our new client. The air was thick with the overwhelming scent of expensive perfume and catered truffle hors d'oeuvres. At the center of it all stood Marcus, holding a microphone like it was a scepter. He was delivering a sprawling, agonizingly hollow speech about strategic vision and relentless innovation. He paced across the makeshift stage, flashing his perfectly bleached teeth, soaking up the applause from the marketing and sales divisions. He spun a fantastical narrative about how his brilliant leadership had driven this technological breakthrough. He talked about paradigm shifts and dynamic synergies, but not once did the words artificial intelligence architecture cross his lips. Not once did he mention my name. Nor did he acknowledge the bruised, sleep-deprived engineering team that had actually forged the product he was currently standing on. I stood pressed against the far wall near the makeshift bar, clutching a glass of sparkling water, maintaining the polite, vacant smile of a diligent employee. The deafening cheers grating against my eardrums did not bother me. I had long ago accepted that in the corporate food chain, the technical architects remain invisible while the executives take the stage. I did not need their shallow applause or a plastic trophy. I only cared about the legally binding employment contract sitting in a locked drawer in my apartment. That contract promised me a 5% equity stake upon the successful deployment and sale of the predictive routing system. That 5% was not just money. It was my entire future. It was the exact amount required to finally obliterate my suffocating student loan debt and secure a modest, quiet house far away from this concrete nightmare. I was completely willing to let Marcus play the visionary genius for the cameras. Just as long as my equity vested by the end of the fiscal quarter, my quiet contemplation was violently interrupted by a sharp waft of heavily floral designer perfume. Chloe, the vice president of finance, materialized beside me out of the crowd. She wore a tailored crimson dress that looked sharper than a surgical scalpel, and her face was plastered with a terrifyingly sweet, heavily practiced smile. Before I could even offer a standard greeting, she reached out and aggressively linked her arm through mine, her manicured fingers gripping my jacket sleeve with surprising, claw-like strength. "Haley, darling," she purred loudly over the thumping bass of the celebration music. "Such an incredible night. We are all just so thrilled. Listen, could I borrow you for just a tiny second? We have a minor paperwork formality to clear up before we can truly let loose and celebrate." She did not wait for an answer. She essentially dragged me away from the party, steering me expertly down the long, heavily carpeted corridor toward the executive suites. We reached the grand boardroom at the very end of the hall, a sterile, intimidating space enclosed entirely by thick, soundproof glass. Chloe pushed the heavy door open, ushered me inside, and let the heavy latch click shut behind us. The transition was jarring. The heavy glass instantly severed the booming music and the roar of the crowd, plunging the room into a suffocating, absolute silence. The moment the door locked, the sickeningly sweet smile vanished from Chloe's face as if it had been wiped away by a dirty rag. Her posture stiffened, her eyes turning into cold, calculating slits. She walked over to the long mahogany table, picked up a single sheet of heavily branded company letterhead, and casually tossed it across the polished wood toward me. It slid and stopped exactly at my fingertips. "Read it," she commanded, her voice devoid of any previous warmth, replaced by a metallic, purely transactional edge. I looked down at the paper. The bold heading read, Reorganization and Compensation Adjustment. I scanned the dense legal jargon, my eyes catching the crucial, devastating phrases. My entire artificial intelligence development department was being officially dissolved and restructured into a nonprofit maintenance group. Effective immediately, my base salary was being slashed by a staggering 60%, and nestled neatly in the third paragraph was the final nail in the coffin. All unvested equity promises, including my 5% stake, were permanently revoked due to a fundamental change in the strategic direction of the company. The artificial intelligence is finished, Haley, Chloe stated, crossing her arms over her chest and looking down her nose at me. The heavy lifting is done, the product is functioning perfectly, and we are now moving into a standard operational phase. Frankly, the company no longer needs to pay an exorbitant architect salary for someone who is now essentially just a code monkey doing routine bug fixes. I remained entirely silent, my eyes fixed on the paper, feeling the cold air of the climate-controlled room press against my skin. Chloe took my silence for submission and pressed her advantage, her tone dripping with absolute condescension. I know this feels abrupt, but let us be realistic. If you are thinking of throwing a tantrum and quitting, I highly suggest you review Section 4 of your original onboarding contract. You signed a watertight, ironclad non-compete agreement. If you walk out that door, you cannot work in the tech sector, the logistics sector, or any adjacent industry for 2 full years. You will be blacklisted. You will lose your career, your income, and you will drown in those student loans you are always whispering about. So, you are going to stay. You are going to maintain the system you built, and you are going to do it for the salary we have graciously decided you are worth. She expected tears. She expected me to scream, to beg, to hurl insults, or to shatter into a million pieces right there on her expensive carpet. That was the reaction executives like Chloe thrived on. They fed on the desperation of the people they crushed beneath their designer heels. Instead, I slowly raised my head. I looked directly into her cold eyes, and I felt the corners of my mouth curl upward into a slow, wide, and utterly unhinged smile. It was not a smile of defeat. It was the chilling, serene smile of a predator that had just watched its prey willingly step into a steel trap. Chloe physically recoiled. Her confident posture faltered for a fraction of a second, a brief flicker of genuine confusion and primal fear crossing her meticulously contoured face. My absolute lack of panic was deeply unsettling to her. I understand completely, Chloe, I said, my voice eerily calm, smooth, and perfectly level. I do not need to keep this physical paper. I only ask that you send a digitally signed PDF copy of this exact document to my personal email address for my own private records. That is all I require. Without waiting for her to respond, I turned my back on her. I walked calmly toward the heavy glass door, pushed it open, and stepped back out into the noisy corridor. I did not look back, but I could feel Chloe standing frozen in the dead silence of the boardroom, shivering slightly, suddenly acutely aware that she had just made a catastrophic miscalculation. I stepped into my cramped apartment at exactly 2 o'clock in the morning. The silence of my own space was a sharp, welcome contrast to the venomous atmosphere I had just left behind. I did not turn on the main lights. Instead, I walked straight to the tiny kitchenette and brewed a cup of black coffee, making it as thick and bitter as tar. The familiar, rich aroma grounded me, washing away the lingering stench of Chloe's expensive perfume. I carried the steaming mug to my small desk, sat down, and opened my personal, heavy-duty laptop. The screen flickered to life, casting a pale, bluish glow across the dark room. I did not log in through the standard virtual private network. That would leave a digital footprint for Marcus to trace. Instead, I initiated a secure shell sequence, accessing a heavily encrypted backdoor I had meticulously coded into the system architecture on my very first day of employment. The terminal window popped up, a simple black square with a blinking white cursor, waiting patiently for my command. I opened my personal email. Chloe, efficient and arrogant as always, had already sent the digitally signed document just as I requested. I downloaded the file, labeled simply as Reorganization and Compensation Adjustment.pdf. I opened a secondary terminal window linked directly to the core directory of Clause 49C. The protocol was highly advanced. It did not just rely on simple commands, it required authenticated documentary proof of a hostile breach of contract. I dragged the encrypted PDF file directly into the verification parser of the clause. The system instantly began to read the document, extracting the digital signatures and cross-referencing the text against my original employment terms, line by line. The algorithm digested the drastic salary reduction and the revocation of my equity. A few seconds later, the terminal spit out a string of green text. The conditions were perfectly met. The system had officially classified the executive decision as a hostile material benefit alteration against the chief architect. This was the point of no return. I placed my hands over the keyboard. The rhythmic clacking of the mechanical keys echoed in the silent apartment as I typed in the final 32-character alphanumeric confirmation sequence. I hit the enter key. If this were a Hollywood movie, alarms would be blaring. Red lights would flash across the screen, and massive warning signs would pop up screaming about a catastrophic system failure. But in the real world of high-level software engineering, true destruction is entirely silent. There was no crash. There was no error code. A simple, unassuming gray progress bar appeared in the center of the terminal window. It filled up smoothly and quietly. 100%. Task completed. Deep within the server banks of Vortexa, the $200 million artificial intelligence routing protocol did not die. It simply went to sleep. The hibernation sequence I triggered severed the neural network from the live feed. Instantly, the entire logistics infrastructure of the company underwent a violent, invisible downgrade. The complex algorithms calculating real-time weather predictions, traffic density, and predictive route optimization were completely disabled. Without the artificial intelligence holding it together, the system automatically defaulted to its baseline failsafe. It violently reverted to the primitive, manual routing technology of the 1990s. From this exact second forward, every single delivery truck belonging to Apex Retail Empire would be dispatched blindly, relying on static, outdated maps and random, chaotic assignments. I closed the terminal and shut down my laptop. The screen went black. I reached around the side of the machine, unplugged the external hard drive containing my encrypted backups, and locked it inside a fireproof safe hidden under my floorboards. Then, I pulled my company-issued smartphone from my pocket, powered it down, and tossed it carelessly into a junk drawer in my desk, closing it with a dull thud. I walked over to the single window of my living room and pushed it wide open. A harsh, freezing gust of the Chicago night wind hit my face, carrying the distant, faint sounds of the sleeping city. I took a deep, deliberate breath, letting the icy air fill my lungs. The crushing weight of the last 4 years, the anxiety, the exploitation, and the endless, unappreciated labor suddenly lifted off my shoulders. I closed the window, walked over to my bed, and laid down. I fell asleep almost instantly, drifting into the deepest, most peaceful rest I had experienced in 4 long years. By the time the sun began to rise, painting the dawn sky in shades of pale orange, the digital butterfly effect had already morphed into a physical catastrophe. Across the country, fleets of heavy refrigerated trucks carrying highly perishable goods were turning onto the wrong highways. Massive distribution warehouses were gridlocked, overwhelmed by a sudden influx of vehicles arriving entirely out of schedule. Back at the Vortexa headquarters, the main administrative dashboard did not show a single red error flag. To the untrained eye, it reported that all servers were online and operational, but the underlying metrics told a horrifying story. The system was functioning at exactly 0.01% efficiency. It was the perfect, undetectable chaos. Monday morning hit the Vortexa headquarters like a high-speed train derailment. The pristine, glass-walled office, usually a temple of quiet corporate efficiency, was completely transformed into a crushed anthill of pure, unadulterated panic. Customer service lines were melting down under the sheer volume of incoming calls. The executives from Apex Retail Empire were screaming through the conference phones, absolutely furious, because their supply chain was evaporating millions of dollars with every single passing hour. Down in the main server room, Marcus was experiencing a full-blown psychological collapse. His custom-tailored silk shirt was completely drenched in nervous sweat, sticking tightly to his back as he frantically hammered away at his keyboard. He stared at the administrative monitor, his eyes wide with raw terror. He was entirely useless. While the corporate suites were practically catching fire, I was miles away, enjoying the crisp morning air at a quiet local park. I was casually sipping a warm vanilla latte and throwing a chewed-up tennis ball for a golden retriever I had borrowed from my neighbor. I did have a secure burner phone in my jacket pocket, strictly configured to monitor the inbound panic without revealing my location. It vibrated so violently and constantly that it felt like a small engine running against my hip. I eventually pulled it out and scrolled through the chaotic barrage of messages. First came the arrogant, commanding texts from Marcus. "Get back to the office right now and fix this minor glitch, or you are permanently fired." An hour later, Chloe took over the assault with aggressive legal threats. "We are currently drafting a massive lawsuit for corporate sabotage. You will be ruined." But by noon, the horrifying reality of their impending doom had finally set in, and the tone shifted to pathetic, desperate begging. "Haley, please, just log in from home. It will take you 2 minutes to fix this. We can talk about adjusting your compensation tomorrow." I smiled, locked the screen, and threw the tennis ball again, completely ignoring the desperate pleas of the people who had tried to destroy me just a few hours prior. Back at the office, Marcus was backed into a corner of his own making, surrendering to me, admitting that he had broken the core product, and begging a subordinate to save his job was a humiliation his massive, fragile ego simply would not allow. Instead of doing the rational thing and reversing the salary cut, he made the single most catastrophic decision of his entire professional life, desperate to regain control without admitting defeat. He bypassed the internal legal department entirely and reached out to a shady contact in his network. He secretly hired a crew of external, freelance gray hat hackers, paying them an absurd amount of off-the-books cash to crack my security architecture, bypass the quarantine, and forcefully awaken the artificial intelligence. It was a beautiful, fatal mistake. The mercenary hackers were incredibly arrogant. They likely looked at the corporate network, assumed I was just another obedient, unimaginative desk worker, and treated my code like a child's puzzle. They initiated a massive, brute force digital assault, throwing highly aggressive decryption scripts at my administrative firewall in a desperate bid to rip the system open. But the moment their unauthorized code slammed into the server architecture, they realized how horribly wrong they were. They did not break the locks. They simply stomped heavily onto the hidden, secondary tripwire embedded deep within Clause 49C. The artificial intelligence was sleeping, but its defensive perimeter was wide awake. The system instantly recognized the brute force attack. It immediately stopped treating the situation as a simple internal contract dispute over financial benefits. The core security parameters violently shifted gears, instantly reclassifying the external intrusion under a terrifying new designation: unauthorized third-party security breach. Because the Vortexa routing software controlled massive fleets of interstate commerce, managing the movement of goods across state lines, it was legally classified as critical national supply chain infrastructure. Clause 49C did not hesitate or wait for human authorization. It immediately activated the Federal Red Alert Protocol. In the span of 3 short seconds, the system autonomously compiled a highly detailed, unredacted security report of the hack, logging the exact digital signatures and entry points that Marcus had so foolishly authorized. Then, the system executed the ultimate checkmate. It bypassed every single internal communication server at Vortexa and fired that explosive report directly to the Cybersecurity Enforcement Division of the Federal Trade Commission. And just to ensure absolute, inescapable destruction, It sent a certified carbon copy straight to the executive legal team at Apex Retail Empire. The desperate, pathetic attempt by Marcus and Chloe to cover up their mess had officially detonated. Their quiet little corporate problem was now a massive, highly public federal incident, and there was absolutely no way to hide the smoke. Exactly 48 hours had passed since the artificial intelligence went to sleep. The financial hemorrhage happening within the company was nothing short of staggering. The stock ticker for Vortexa Global Solutions was in an absolute, unstoppable freefall, shedding hundreds of millions of dollars in market capitalization before the lunch hour even hit. The corporate sharks at Apex Retail Empire did not deal in mercy, and they certainly did not tolerate delays. Their terrifying army of corporate lawyers delivered a brutal, uncompromising ultimatum directly to our legal department. The demand was incredibly simple and entirely lethal. We had exactly 24 hours to completely restore the predictive routing network. If we failed to meet that deadline, Apex would immediately file a $500 million lawsuit for a catastrophic breach of contract, a move that would effectively bury Vortexa in a mountain of inescapable debt and trigger an immediate bankruptcy. The sheer magnitude of the impending disaster forcibly yanked our chief executive officer, a man named Vance, right out of his luxurious ski vacation in Aspen. He flew back on a chartered private jet, storming into the corporate headquarters like a furious, cornered animal. He immediately convened an emergency session of the board of directors in the main glass conference room. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage as he pounded his fists heavily on the polished mahogany table, screaming at the top of his lungs. He demanded that his private security teams physically drag me out of my apartment and throw me directly into a federal courtroom. "I want her locked in a concrete box for cyber terrorism," he roared at his trembling subordinates, completely blind to the terrifying reality of the trap that was rapidly closing around his own throat. But the corporate guillotine is a highly precise weapon that cuts both ways. The head of the legal department, a pale, sweating man who looked like he had not slept in a week, cautiously interrupted the violent tirade of the chief executive officer. He slid a thick, heavily tabbed binder across the table. His voice trembled uncontrollably as he delivered the crushing blow to the executives. Clause 49C was not a piece of rogue malware. It was not a malicious virus designed by a vengeful hacker. It was a fully sanctioned, entirely legal piece of corporate compliance software. And the absolute worst part of the revelation was the signature at the bottom of the approval form. Vance himself had digitally signed and approved the deployment of that exact security update exactly 6 months ago. He had blindly authorized it without ever bothering to read a single line of the technical documentation. The artificial intelligence system was not rebelling against the company. It was merely strictly enforcing the exact legally binding employment contract that they themselves had drafted. They had essentially handed me a loaded gun, and now they were furious that the weapon discharged when they tried to rob me. The horrifying realization of their own arrogant incompetence completely shattered Marcus and Chloe. The smug superiority that had fueled them during the champagne celebration totally evaporated, quickly replaced by a suffocating, paranoid terror. They were staring straight down the barrel of massive federal fines, permanent blacklisting, and the total destruction of their lucrative careers. Desperation always breeds absolute depravity. Huddled together in a frantic, whispered conversation in the far corner of the executive suite, they concocted a vile, last-ditch contingency plan. If they could not beat the encrypted code, they would simply destroy the architect. They immediately began hastily forging digital communication logs and fabricating offshore banking records. Intending to frame me, they planned to present this highly doctored, fake evidence to the incoming federal investigators, spinning a desperate lie that I had accepted a massive cash bribe from a rival logistics competitor to intentionally sabotage the Apex deal. They wanted to serve me up as the perfect, disposable scapegoat to save their own miserable skins. What those terrified executives failed to understand was that they were still operating entirely inside my digital domain. Sitting comfortably at the desk in my apartment, I was monitoring their every single move through a deeply buried, invisible encrypted data stream. I watched their frantic internal messages cross my screen in real time. I saw the fabricated documents forming in their shared cloud folders, tracking every keystroke they made to build their web of lies. I felt absolutely no fear. Their pathetic attempt at a frame-up was the final piece of the puzzle I needed to completely annihilate them. I reached for my mechanical keyboard one last time and calmly activated the ultimate module of my defensive architecture, a hidden subroutine. I simply called the transparency protocol. The endgame had officially begun. It was time to stop hiding in the cold shadows of the server room. I took a long, hot shower and dressed with meticulous, calculated care. I bypassed my usual cheap, worn-out company hoodies and put on a sharp, perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit that felt like a suit of impenetrable armor. I grabbed my car keys, walked out of my apartment, and got into my vehicle. The morning drive to the headquarters was incredibly peaceful. I felt a cold, unshakable confidence radiating through my veins. I was about to walk directly into the executive boardroom, stepping straight into the den of wolves who were actively sharpening their teeth, fully prepared to tear my life apart. As I pulled my car into the executive parking garage of the Vortexa building, the atmosphere was already incredibly heavy with impending doom. Just 2 levels above me, the board members were waiting to spring their fabricated trap, but they were not the only ones arriving for a reckoning this morning. Down on the street level, a massive convoy of dark sport utility vehicles pulled up sharply to the main entrance. The heavy doors swung open, and a heavily armed team of stern-faced special agents from the Federal Trade Commission stepped onto the pavement. Right behind them, the piercing wail of police sirens shattered the tense morning air as several local cruisers moved in to block all the building exits. The authorities had arrived to answer the automated distress beacon I had sent them. The stage was perfectly set, and the final corporate slaughter was about to commence. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the executive boardroom. The atmosphere inside was suffocating, thick with a toxic mixture of expensive cologne and desperate, manufactured outrage. The moment my perfectly polished shoes stepped onto the thick carpet, Marcus violently shoved his leather chair back. He leaped to his feet. His face flushed a furious shade of crimson and pointed a shaking finger directly at my face. "There she is!" Marcus bellowed, his voice echoing sharply against the acoustic panels. "Secure the doors! Do not let her leave. I want corporate security up here this exact second, and I want her placed under immediate citizen arrest." He launched into a wildly dramatic, carefully rehearsed monologue. He paced around the edge of the massive mahogany table, loudly accusing me of masterminding a massive corporate espionage operation. He spun a fantastical tale about how I had deliberately sabotaged the artificial intelligence infrastructure because I had accepted a massive, illegal cash bribe from our biggest logistics competitor. He claimed he and Chloe had spent the entire morning uncovering my digital trail of treason. At the far end of the table, Chief Executive Officer Vance watched me with eyes full of utter disgust, fully buying into their fabricated narrative. Beside him, Chloe sat back in her chair, holding a crystal glass of ice water, shooting me a sickening, triumphant smirk. They thought they had backed me into an inescapable corner. They thought they were the predators. I did not raise my voice. I did not attempt to defend myself against his ridiculous accusations. I maintained complete, terrifying silence. I walked straight past Marcus, completely ignoring his frantic yelling, and moved deliberately to the head of the boardroom table. I reached into the inside pocket of my tailored charcoal gray suit, pulled out a small, encrypted titanium USB drive, and slotted it smoothly into the main projector console. I tapped a single command on the podium keyboard. Instantly, the massive, wall-sized presentation monitor behind me flared to life, casting a harsh, bright light over the stunned faces of the board members. The screen did not display the source code of the predictive routing system. It did not show my employment contract or the fake evidence Marcus had just spent hours forging. Instead, the monitor flashed a stark, bold warning in bright red text. Executing Clause 49C. Final phase. Decrypting cash flow. "What is this nonsense?" Vance demanded, his voice booming over the sudden, confused murmurs of the room. Turn that off immediately. I stepped aside, allowing the entire room a completely unobstructed view of their impending ruin. I finally spoke, my voice chillingly calm and carrying to every corner of the room. Clause 49C was designed to protect the integrity of the artificial intelligence from internal threats, I explained smoothly. But to properly identify a threat, a predictive algorithm must analyze all surrounding data ecosystems. For the past 1 year, my system has not just been routing trucks. It has been silently monitoring the financial data packets flowing through the internal network, specifically scanning for structural anomalies in the research and development budget. The red warning text on the screen dissolved. In its place, a massive cascade of heavily encrypted documents spilled across the display. The system was projecting perfectly clear, undeniable copies of hidden offshore bank statements located in the Cayman Islands. Next to them appeared decrypted internal emails between Marcus and Chloe, completely unredacted, alongside a massive, undeniably clear history of untraceable cryptocurrency transactions. The system found a massive, bleeding loophole, I continued, pacing slowly as I narrated their destruction. It turns out, Marcus and Chloe were not just bad at their jobs. They were incredibly busy setting up a sophisticated slush fund. Over the last 12 months, they have systematically embezzled millions of dollars directly from the operating costs of my research and development department, funneling the company capital straight into their own private offshore pockets. Absolute silence slammed into the boardroom. The arrogant smirks completely vanished. But then, I said, leaning casually against the podium, the $200 million deal with Apex Retail Empire happened. A deal of that massive magnitude requires a full, rigorous, third-party financial audit. They panicked. They knew the auditors would immediately spot the massive financial hole they had dug. So, they needed to balance the books instantly. That is why they suddenly restructured my department. That is why they slashed my salary by 60% and revoked my equity. They were not changing strategic directions. They were desperately trying to use my stolen wages to quietly cover up their own massive embezzlement before the federal auditors arrived. The color rapidly drained from the face of Marcus until he looked like a walking corpse. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He just stood there, hyperventilating, his eyes darting frantically around the room as the undeniable proof of his federal crimes scrolled relentlessly across the giant screen. Beside him, Chloe began to shake so violently that the crystal glass slipped from her manicured fingers. It hit the mahogany table and shattered into a dozen pieces, the ice water spilling onto her expensive lap. Chief Executive Officer Vance slowly turned his head, staring at his two trusted executives with a look of absolute, unadulterated horror. He finally realized the catastrophic magnitude of the betrayal, and it had nothing to do with me. Right at that exact second, before anyone could formulate a single excuse, the heavy glass doors of the boardroom burst wide open. The timing of the universe is sometimes a beautiful thing. A team of stern, heavily armed federal agents from the Federal Trade Commission marched into the room, their dark tactical boots thudding heavily against the carpet. They bypassed me entirely and marched straight toward the two terrified executives. "Marcus and Chloe," the lead agent announced, his voice carrying the absolute, uncompromising weight of federal authority. "You are both under arrest for massive corporate fraud, financial embezzlement, and wire fraud. Stand up and place your hands where I can see them." The boardroom devolved into absolute chaos. Marcus finally found his voice and began sobbing hysterically, desperately trying to blame Chloe, while Chloe shrieked and completely broke down as the cold steel handcuffs clicked tightly around her wrists. The authorities forcefully marched the two ruined villains out of the room, parading them right past the shocked, paralyzed members of the board of directors. Vance slumped back into his chair, burying his face in his hands, watching his entire executive leadership completely disintegrate in front of his eyes. Up on the massive presentation monitor, the artificial intelligence system registered the physical removal of the hostile actors. The aggressive red interface softly blinked, smoothly transitioning into a calming, solid green color. A new message typed itself across the screen. "Internal threat neutralized. Quarantine ended. System 100% restored." Across the country, Thousands of paralyzed freight trucks suddenly received their optimized routing instructions. The warehouses unclogged. The $200 million supply chain roared back to life, functioning flawlessly once again. I calmly walked back to the projector console, reached out, and pulled my titanium USB drive free. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my plastic company identification badge, and tossed it carelessly onto the center of the mahogany table. It landed with a soft, final clatter. As I turned to walk away, my burner phone buzzed sharply in my pocket. I pulled it out and glanced at the bright screen. It was a direct, encrypted text message from the Chief Operating Officer of Apex Retail Empire. "Our system just ran perfectly," the message read. "We know exactly who holds the real magic over there. Tomorrow morning, please come directly to my private office. The Chief Technology Officer position at Apex is waiting for you." I locked the screen of the phone and slid it back into my tailored suit. I smiled, a genuine, warm smile, and pushed the heavy glass doors open. I walked out of the building and stepped straight into the bright, warm sunlight of the late morning. The boardroom behind me was nothing more than a smoking pile of corporate ashes, completely consumed by the flames of their own arrogance. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. I truly appreciate every single one of you, and I would love to know where you are listening from. So please drop your city or country in the comments below. As I mentioned earlier, YouTube has demonetized our channel, meaning we have absolutely no budget left and will not be uploading any new videos here in the foreseeable future. We are moving everything over to Patreon. If you found today's story entertaining and want to support our work, please help us out by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon community. Over there, you will get to hear the absolute best, most intense, exclusive true stories that we simply cannot make public on YouTube. You can easily join by scanning the QR code currently displayed on your screen, or by clicking the Patreon link we have provided in the video description and in the pinned comment. Thank you again for your incredible support, and I hope to see you all over on Patreon very soon.